Welcome everyone to the Thursday edition of our Packers News live chat alongside Ryan Wood. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers hit the field today, gearing up for their game this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll take a look at how outside linebacker Preston Smith has performed recently, plus we'll also take a look ahead to the Eagles defense. Before we get into that, as always, you know the drill. We want to hear from you. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a question down in the chat, leave us a thought. Ryan and I want to hear from you. We'll get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. Going into this game against the Bears, all eyes were on outside linebacker Preston Smith. He only had a sack and a half through 10 weeks, which pales in comparison to his first 10 weeks of 2019 when he had double-digit sacks. Finally, something clicked for him on Sunday night against the Bears when he had 2 quarterback hits, a sack, and he also had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. How significant would it be if Preston Smith was able to reemerge during this final month of the season for the Packers defense?
Oh, it's huge. I don't think there's any question, because what made the Packers defense, especially their defensive front, the pressure they got on opposing quarterbacks every week last season, what made that so good was that they had bookends. And if you look at this year, Zadarius Smith, he might not have the pressures he had last year, but he's got 9 sacks. He's ranked 5th in the league with 9 sacks in 11 games. He's had his encore season. Preston Smith had 12 sacks last year. He's at 2.5 now in 11 games this year. The decline, if you've sensed that there's less pass rush than a year ago, there's a reason for that. It's Preston Smith's, when you have 10 fewer sacks, I mean, it's a big drop off. So if he's able to finish this month strong and go get going and kind of find a rhythm going into the playoffs, I don't think there's any doubt, Olivia, that gives them their bookends back, and they're a much better defense when they've got the Smiths instead of just Zadarius Smith.
Preston Smith and the outside linebackers must be licking their lips looking at quarterback Carson Wentz and the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line. The offensive line in particular has been Swiss cheese because they've simply been dealing with so many injuries this season. They've allowed 46 sacks on Wentz, and Wentz himself has thrown 15 interceptions. How can Smith carry the momentum from this past week's game against the Bears into this game against the Philadelphia Eagles?
Well, it starts with just being able to get consistent pressure on Carson Wentz. And here's the thing, Olivia, if they do, Carson Wentz is going to give these DBs some opportunities. Carson Wentz leads the NFL in 15 interceptions. And earlier this week, when Doug Peterson was asked for probably the 100th time this season, what's wrong with Carson Wentz, he said that he's had the conversation with him. You don't have to be Superman. And it's easy to understand why Carson Wentz might feel like he has to be Superman, because there's been a lot of injuries, and that offensive line has been very poor, which when you're uncomfortable as a quarterback, you start feeling like you got to do more. You got to play above yourself. The other part with Carson Wentz, he's played at a very high level in this league. Early in his career, he's a former number 2 overall pick, and before that injury in 2017, he was playing at a very, very high level. He's a franchise caliber starting quarterback level. So he's done that. Now, if he starts getting comfortable on Sunday afternoon, it could be a long day for this Packers defense. You know, that last year Carson Wentz carved him up pretty good because he was comfortable. If they get him uncomfortable, though, the DBs need to be ready, because when he gets uncomfortable, he's been throwing balls up and giving opportunities for interceptions, and that's where this game could very, very quickly change.
Let's take a look at what this Packers offense will face in the Philadelphia Eagles defense. Packers wide receiver Davante Adams has said multiple times that he loves man coverage. He is known for his ability to win one-on-one matchups, specifically at the line of scrimmage. The Eagles, on the other hand, run a lot of man coverage. This past week against the Seattle Seahawks, cornerback Darius Slay allowed wide receiver DK Metcalf to have 177 receiving yards. How likely is it that Adams can have a similar day this weekend?
Well, you just look at his game log this year, and he's having that day every game. So, what is it, 6 straight games now where he's had a touchdown, which is absurd. He's had 100 yards in about half his games, I think, this year. It's been very impressive. So, Davante Adams against the secondary, I'd expect him to carve it up just like he's carved up every secondary.
The Eagles' defense has been absolutely solid on the ground right now. They are 9th in the NFL, averaging about 4.1 yards allowed per carry, and they were even more successful on Monday against the Seattle Seahawks. They held them to 2.5 yards per carry on average. What do the Packers offense need to do to continue the momentum that they were able to establish against the Chicago Bears when they had around 182 yards on the ground?
Well, could be getting fortunate for the second straight week, because it certainly helped to not have to block Akeem Hicks on Sunday night with the Bears, and Fletcher Cox, second straight practice today that he missed because of the neck injury. This Eagles defensive front without Fletcher Cox, it's even bigger drop off than the Bears defensive front without Akeem Hicks, because at least with the Chicago's defensive front, you still have a Khalil Mack. You still have other guys that you've got to really respect. The difference between Fletcher Cox and not Fletcher Cox with the Eagles is huge. So if they're able to get fortunate again, certainly this is an Eagles defense that this Packers offensive line should feel very good about, even without this. Even if Fletcher Cox plays on Sunday, it'll be interesting. They got almost nothing going on the ground week 4 last year, the last time these two teams played. They just weren't able to get much movement up front. They were forced to basically air it out all game, and Aaron Rodgers had 400 yards and they had a big game. But it'll be very interesting if they do have Fletcher Cox to see if this Packers offensive line can get more movement than it did a year ago.
Let's head over to Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube to take some of your questions right now. Thank you all for joining us tonight. If you have not yet asked a question, don't be a lurker. We know you're out there. We want to hear from you. It is not too late. Leave it down below or right now. Let's start with Joshua over on Facebook. Joshua says, loved the Packers offense now that they're at where we are. The Packers are at full potential, or will be at full potential just about. What are our thoughts on maybe what this offense can do? The Packers offense every week seemingly inches closer to full health. Then there is injuries that pop up on the report. This past week it was wide receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who was dealing with an Achilles injury late in the week. He was active for the game, however, he was not really involved much in the game. And then there's running back / return specialist Tyler Ervin, who has also been dealing with some injury this season. He has missed 4 games, including the last 2 with a ribs injury. Now it's looking like they will be healthy. However, now the offensive line is dealing with more injuries. Center Corey Linsley is expected to miss 2 to 6 weeks with a sprained MCL in his left leg. Ryan, how good can this Packers offense continue to be, even though they seem to be going up and down in health every single week?
Well, the good thing for them is if there's one area on this entire team that has depth and can afford to absorb a loss to a key starter, it would be the interior offensive line. So, yeah, Corey Linsley's not going to play this week, but guess what? They've got Elton Jenkins, who is going to play center, likely center, and they're good at guard. John Runyon Jr. has been really, really good as a 6th-round rookie. Lucas Patrick's been just fine as a starting right guard, and Aaron Rodgers has said multiple times this year that Lucas Patrick's outplaying the contract extension that he signed to do what he's done, which is to be a spot starter for Lane Taylor, who went down in the opener. So this is a strength of this team and this offense is the interior offensive line, the depth that they have there. That's awfully big for them, and yeah, if they get their full complement of pieces together, it could be a very, very good offense.
On Sunday, the Packers are going to roll out their 6th starting offensive line combination of the season. Still, quarterback Aaron Rodgers has only been sacked 11 times this season. Pretty mind-blowing, if you ask me. Let's go over to Andrew on Facebook. Andrew wants to know, will wide receiver Tavon Austin see time this weekend? The Packers recently signed wide receiver / running back / return specialist Tavon Austin to the active 53. He is eligible and available to play on Sunday, as he had to pass all of his COVID-19 protocols in order to sign with the team in the first place. So he is healthy and good to go. How likely is it that the Packers want to see him out there this Sunday?
Yeah, if he's active, it probably won't be for very many plays. He's going to have to learn some of the playbook and kind of get his feet wet. I think that maybe next week might be more likely, once he's had a full week, to kind of ingratiate himself into the offense. But even if he is active, even if he's not getting a lot of plays, he's a guy that can help you a lot in special teams as a return guy. And certainly I think that you look at him as, Aaron Rodgers talked this week about the necessity of having roles and how important that is for players. Tavon Austin's a guy, he's got dual roles. He's got more than one role. He's got the special teams role, and he's got that niche role on offense. And so I think the offensive role is going to take more time to adjust and develop than the special teams role. Special teams, you got to be able to help the special teams pretty early.
Let's go back over to Periscope for a question from our friend Smumster, who has another question about a certain wide receiver. They ask, would the Packers kick the tires on former Texans wide receiver Kenny Stills? He is an upgrade over, say, Malik Taylor or wide receiver Equanimeous St. Brown. So Kenny Stills was released by the Texans. He went through the waiver wire unclaimed. How likely is it that the Packers would be interested in Stills if they were able to get him for the right price this season?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they gave him a look. I'm sure he's being considered. I'm sure he's been discussed about the front office. But there's just a gap between discussing a guy, considering a guy, and actually signing a guy, and that's where I'm not sure. Look, they've got some thin receiving corps, but Marquez Valdez-Scantling has been coming on. Equanimeous St. Brown has been coming on. They did just sign Tavon Austin. So I don't know how likely it is that they'd go out now and get another free agent on the open market, especially a guy that's been casted off. But it wouldn't shock me, but I don't know that I'd be holding my breath for it.
Speaking of wide receiver Equanimeous St. Brown, we have a question here from our German friend Marcel over on Facebook. Hello, Marcel. He says, it looks like Equanimeous St. Brown is playing better over the last 2 to 3 games. Very exciting about what he can bring to this offense. St. Brown this past week against the Bears had his best game of the season, 46 all-purpose yards. The week before that, he had 23 yards receiving. St. Brown has been dealing with the knee injury that he was on the injury report earlier to start the season. He is still dealing with the lingering effects of that. How good can St. Brown be once he is finally fully healthy?
It's a good question, Olivia, because he's missed a lot of football. But I agree, Marcel. I think that over the last 2 or 3 games, he has been finding some traction in this offense. And it hasn't been much, but they might not need all that much from Equanimeous St. Brown this season, especially. If he's able to give him anything, it's almost a bonus with how much time he's missed. And he's done more than nothing. I mean, he has had some contributions. So I think that offensively, they've done a good job of putting him in some really simple situations where he can just catch the ball out in space and go make a play, or use his athleticism, which we know he has, especially now that he's feeling healthy, and just make plays. They haven't asked too much of him, and I would imagine that'll continue.
Thanks, Marcel, for your question. We appreciate it. Let's go over to Amma on Facebook. Amma asks, how much do you see new defensive tackle Anthony Rush playing this week? Rush has only played 13 games in his 2-year career in the NFL. How likely is it that he is up to speed and the Packers would be interested in having him play this upcoming weekend?
Well, they could use the depth. There's no question about that. Anthony Rush, the thing that everyone keeps saying is, well, what's your first impression of him? And he's a big guy. He's a real big guy, and he's got the size to give you some depth and work into the rotation as a run defender, and that's what they need on their defensive line. So kind of like Tavon Austin on the other side, it's pretty easy to see a role for Anthony Rush. It's not a big role, but it is a role to be able to play and contribute to that defensive line. So I would imagine that he gets maybe a handful of snaps. He works his way in there. I don't know if that starts this week or down the road, but at some point, he's going to work his way into the rotation if he stays healthy. It's just another big body he can throw out there against the run.
Thanks so much, Amma, for your question. Let's go over to Josh on Facebook. Josh wants to know, is tight end Robert Tonyan the number 1 tight end on the Packers? And what does that mean for 2019 draft pick Jace Sternberger? How has Jace's progress in the leagues? How has he progressed so far in the league, in our opinions? This past week alone, just against the Bears, Tonyan was targeted 5 times in the game, Sternberger only once. How does Tonyan's development and recent success, especially, impact how much attention Jace Sternberger gets in the offense?
Well, Robert Tonyan's ahead of Jace Sternberger on the depth chart, no question about that. He is the number 1 receiving threat at tight end in this offense. He's not the number 1 blocking tight end. That's still Mercedes Lewis, and he's still going to play quite a bit on early downs. But Robert Tonyan has been a better blocker than I think the Packers could have hoped early on, as a guy that's a former Division III failed quarterback that moved to receiver and never blocked bigger bodies before he got to the NFL. He's done a pretty good job of it this season. But they're wanting him to open the middle of the seam and to catch vertical passes and to be a big play threat, and that's what he's done very, very well. As far as Jace Sternberger, look, you need more than 1 receiving threat at tight end in this league. You can't just have 1 guy. And Mercedes Lewis is almost exclusively a blocker at this point. A really good one for this offense, but but he's not going to give you a whole bunch. And I know that he's got 3 touchdowns this season, but he's not going to give you a whole bunch in the receiving game. Jace Sternberger's their secondary threat as a receiver. He's had some moments this season. He's still a young guy. He's still developing. Long term, I think it's too early to say what he's going to be, but I think it's also too early to give up on Jace Sternberger. I think that he has had some moments this year, and he is a guy that could theoretically still develop.
Thanks, Josh, for your question. We appreciate it. Let's go over to Ron, also on Facebook. Ron, he says that offensive lineman John Runyon Jr. has been the Packers' best performing draft pick this season. What on earth happened to running back A.J. Dillon? Let's give you an update there on A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon remains on COVID-19 reserve. He has been on that list for over a month now. It was a month to the day yesterday. He actually reappeared at practice on the sideline yesterday. He was present, observing practice, not yet participating. However, we don't know exactly when he will be back at practice. COVID-19 is going to impact every single player differently, just as it impacted Chris Barnes one way. He came off of COVID-19 reserve just yesterday. He appeared back at practice, Barnes did, I believe on November 18th. It took him about 2 weeks for him to get fully integrated back into practice. When should Packers fans roughly expect to see A.J. Dillon back in action with the Packers?
Well, it could be this week. What happened to A.J. Dillon? COVID happened to A.J. Dillon because he was just starting to get more opportunities, and then he tested positive for COVID-19. I look at A.J. Dillon's season as really a redshirt year. They've got 2 veterans ahead of him that might just be the best 1-2 punch at running back in the league with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. Running backs, that position that you want to limit the attrition. You want to limit the miles on the tires if you can. And the Packers absolutely can because, again, they've got Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. So this is kind of a redshirt year for A.J. Dillon. I don't think it's indicative at all of the type of player that he's going to be. He's too big and too fast to think, he's not a player. I mean, he looks like a player. He had a terrific training camp, and he's a guy that you feel pretty sure that next year either or Aaron Jones or Jamal Williams they're not both going to be in that backfield. There's going to be a role that opens up for him within the next year. So I think it's too early to count out A.J. Dillon. It's just why would you put a lot of mileage on those tires when you know that he still factors into the long-term plans? The bottom line, if this is a redshirt year, you've seen redshirt running backs have really good college careers, and I think that's the same way with A.J. Dillon.
Thank you so much, Ron, for your question. Let's go over to Michael now on Facebook. Michael says, what, if anything, is the plan to stop the dang run? He missed defensive coordinator Mike Pettine's presser today. This past year, in 2019, when the Packers faced the Eagles were able to run the ball up pretty well against the Packers defense. They had over 150 rushing yards, and defensive lineman Kenny Clark said a lot of those yards came on explosive plays. How do the Packers focus on limiting explosive plays against the Eagles this weekend?
Well, first of all, I didn't realize that we had to relegate it to dang on Facebook Live. I'm really glad that I learned that because I could have gotten in trouble.
Keep it clean here.
Well, this is a family show, right? It's a great question. They haven't done it yet, so when are they ever going to do it? I'll believe when I see it, Olivia. I'll believe that this defense stops the run when they actually stop the run, and not a moment before. And what's the plan? They'll tell you that the plan's been the same thing for almost 2 seasons now. It is guys who need to be gap integrity, assignment sure, not doing more than what the framework of the defense wants them to do, and just playing within themselves. And this is a broken recording because it's what we hear every single week. So until they do it, I don't expect it to get done.
Let's continue along our conversation about the defense here with another question from Marcel. Marcel wants to know, will Darius Slay follow Davante Adams all over the field, or will he just play on his side of the field? What are the Packers anticipating for the secondary's response to the Packers wide receivers, namely Davante Adams?
Yeah, I don't know how they'll do that. It'll be really interesting to see once the game starts if they follow Slay or not. I would think that there's a chance because Darius Slay is you traded for Darius Slay, right? You went out to get him to be your number one corner. And what do you want with the number one corner other than to shadow the number one receiver? You want this to be your guy that can give you that matchup. Now, I think the Packers will take that in spades because I think there isn't a corner in the league that the Packers wouldn't feel good about throwing to Devontae Adams now. But no, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the Eagles decide to do there defensively.
Thanks, Marcel, for another great question, and thank all of you very much for joining us tonight. We will be back tomorrow to once again preview the game, take your questions, so make sure you come back. If we didn't get your question answered today, come back tomorrow and we'll give it another go then. For Ryan Wood, I am Olivia Reiner. We will see you next time.